Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying time is here. That's right, we're talking about John Carpenter's Christine on Kill by Kill. Well, greetings and salutations, Internet. It's your old pal, Patrick Henson, coming to you once again from Rockdale, California. Is that what it's called? Something like that. Some made-up California town. This is the Kill by Kill podcast, where we are dedicated to celebrating the least discussed component of any horror film, the characters. We're going to unpack all the goriest details of 1983's Christine in the hopes that a teen high school student's untimely end is just the beginning of the jokes we might make at their expense. And as always, there's only one person I trust that if my car catches on fire, she'll make sure to run me over off camera. The one, the only Gina Radcliffe. How are you doing today, Gina?
Yeah, you really need to emphasize the air quotes on teen and high school students.
Yes. As tough as it has been to see some high school students in the course of our podcasting history in various slasher movies and whatnot, there are some quote-unquote teens here that literally look like they have vested a 401k.
Yeah, Buddy Repperton has been married and divorced like twice before he's even graduated high school.
He appears to have done a couple tours in NAMM, which is odd. I wrote down that he was held back since 1965. The movie supposedly takes place in 1978. So he is decidedly in his 30s, comfortably in his 30s. Everyone else is definitely in their 20s, but he just, that is taken a tad too far.
It's just a skosh.
Just a skosh. Well, I don't want to scare you, Gina, but we are not alone. That's right. We have a special guest. Now, you know him, of course, as a film critic over at The Wrap and from his podcast on the Critically Acclaimed Network, including Canceled Too Soon, which is returning not too soon. The one, the only, William Bibbiani. How are you doing today, William?
I am very well, thank you very much. I am very excited to be talking to you about an expertise I have in classic cars. Do I know about classic cars? I've seen them.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm aware of their existence. I cannot be referred to as a car guy in the sense that I know of their existence, but I've never been mechanically inclined. These fingies only clickety clack on keyboards. That's their only skill.
But we are quite good at it, aren't we?
There we go.
Just well trained.
Now, William.
Yeah.
What was your first experience with John Carpenter's Christine?
My first experience with John Carpenter's Christine was probably a little too young. Like a lot of the great 80s horror movies, I saw them probably when I was like 5 or 6.
Oh, my.
My dad took me to see like Predator and RoboCop when I was like 5 and 6. And you know what?
Oh, wow.
I turned out fine. I was too young to see Christine when it came out, but by the time, I was old enough to like watch TV on my own, it was in regular rotation on network television. And it was actually a film that I deeply loved. I really loved this movie from top to bottom. I think, John Carpenter is no slouch in the directing department. And although, he's considered a filmmaker who's done a whole bunch of classics, I don't know anyone who really disrespects Christine, but it rarely makes anyone's like top 5 of his films. And I'm not entirely sure that's fair. I loved the characters. I loved the way that it sort of married horror with like action car filmmaking towards the end. Yeah. And I put it to you that the scene where Christine rebuilds herself is still to this day one of the most impressive visual effects ever captured in movies. So This was kind of formative to me. It was one of, if not my very first Stephen King movies, and I'm a huge fan to this day.
Yeah, I love Christine. I have always loved Christine. I think it has undergone a bit of a reappreciation in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of its place in his filmography. It's just very, very good looking. I mean, he doesn't make crap looking movies. That's to be said, but it looks amazing and it is very well told. It's a lean and mean 150 minutes. It's very character forward. You can't say that this movie does not examine its characters. It's very laser focused in that. And in my mind, it's one of his better character studies. And it's just, there's a component to it that's inherently sad that I enjoy. Like a sad song you listen to make yourself feel better. There's a undercurrent of remorse. Just, it feels like a breakup movie too, in a sense.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because this is coming off the heels of The Thing, in which he's been given a full year by Universal Studios to make that movie. And I have to believe I know Gina and I agree on this, but it is an unmitigated classic, not just a horror classic. It is an unmitigated classic in cinema.
All-timer.
And it just lands with a sickening thud.
It had one of the worst opening months you could possibly open a movie in.
Right.
Like if you weren't E.T., if you weren't I think Poltergeist was the same month. I mean, Blade Runner tanked that same time. Even Megaforce. Megaforce.
The Megaforce. There are flying motorcycles in that.
My God, Barry Bostwick in his prime.
He kisses his thumb and you're like, hey. And
that's
he kisses his thumb at
that's
people.
Why I do that. That's why everyone does that now. Now people don't even realize.
We're all doing that these days. That's why the kids on TikTok do it.
And the thing is that The Thing was a great movie. It was really, really intense. And maybe it was a tough sell in the summer season.
Yeah.
But, sometimes you pull a lousy weekend. And you know what? Christine is another example of that.
Yeah.
Christine opened the exact same weekend as Terms of Endearment. Now, I realize that today that might not sound like all that big a deal, but that was one of the highest grossing films of the year.
If I'm not mistaken, it was the highest grossing movie of 1983.
It also opened against Brian De Palma's Scarface.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Clint Eastwood's Sudden Impact, the Dirty Harry movie, and Barbra Streisand's Yentl.
What?
What are you supposed to do?
Is happening this weekend?
That is not fair.
I'm sorry.
It's a miracle it made any money.
All deference to Barbenheimer, but just listen to the list of movies that William just rattled off the top of his brain.
They don't make weekends like that anymore.
They do not. They absolutely do not. You have a smorgasbord.
And that was in December.
That's also very odd to release this in December. It does not feel like a Christmas movie.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is that it does take, at least in the book, it does take place at Christmas.
They mention New Year's in the movie, so it is in that vein. Of course, it's in California, so there's not a lot of snow or seasonal elements to it. So that kind of makes sense. It's also probably worth noting that this movie was really kind of raced out. They started filming just a couple of days after the novel was first published.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So this was everyone was trying to strike while the iron was really, really hot when it came to Stephen King novels at this time, because nowadays we think, oh, there's been a million Stephen King adaptations. When Christine was in pre-production, there hadn't been that many yet.
Yes, all of them had been something. Carrie had been a massive hit in 76.
True.
And Salem's Lot did so well on television that they literally aired it mere months after it first aired. They're just like, here it is again, this thing you're demanding to have happen.
And it yielded an underrated sequel, but I'm sure that's a topic for another podcast.
Very, very much is.
But then there was The Shining, and then there was Creepshow. And then in 1983 alone, there were 3 Stephen King movies, and I think they're all among the best Stephen King movies, because we had Cujo, David Cronenberg's The Dead Zone, and John Carpenter's Christine in rapid succession.
Yes.
It's also interesting to note that those 3 are probably arguably the most faithful adaptations Stephen King novels.
Yeah, and even that's true. And yet, even so, they do take some liberties. Like in both Christine and Cujo, like the title monster in the books was far more of a ghostly possession.
Yeah.
Whereas in Cujo, the movie, they just focused on the rabies. And in Christine, they decided to change it in the adaptation so that Christine was just literally like born bad.
Yes.
Like just right off the assembly line.
And I think, in an adaptation, you have to take what works for the medium that you're going to tell that story in and leave other things behind. And I do think the LeBay stuff, while it works in the novel, would be harder to pull off here. That's more of a 3-part relationship where I think this is deeper because it is just between Arnie and Christine.
It's a lot less clean. Yeah. If it's a matter of Arnie buys this haunted car and it is haunted by the ghost of the previous owner and Arnie just kind of starts acting like him, which he does anyway, but in the movie, and I think they were wise to streamline that, it's just about he falls in love with the car. That's it.
Yeah.
And you make it about something that I think everyone can relate to. The idea of again, we're talking about car culture here, and the movie is very steeped, even though it was, it's set in the 70s, made in the 80s, but it was about like greaser culture in the 1950s. This idea of you fall in love with your car. Your first car is a magical thing. Everyone remembers their first car.
Right.
And so we're just going to take that and then just go to another extreme. And then another extreme on top of that. Once you start adding in, and also you're haunted by the ghost of the previous owner, you don't need that. That's putting a hat on a hat.
Well, people are going to want to know what his deal is. And you can tell that story in a novel. You have all the time in the world.
I do prefer the novel's ending because I think it makes it more of a tragedy in which Arnie is actually killed at a different time than the final confrontation in the garage. Him and his mother are in an accident out on a highway.
Yeah.
And then Dennis recounts that a witness saw Arnie, quote unquote, fighting someone in the car. So, that's kind of like this last gasp of Arnie, trying to retake his humanity and dying for it. Yeah. I think in a movie that you can't really portray that in a way that I think King intended to suggest. So I think having him just be under the full control of Christine at this point was the better choice, even if it made a slightly less emotional impact.
I think it's actually interesting that you bring that up because Stephen King has been like kind of weirdly dismissive of Christine as an adaptation. He didn't say it was bad, really. He called it boring. In fact, the two movies that he referred to as boring in the same sentence I forget if it was an interview or like an introduction to one of his books, were Christine and The Shining. Now,
I love Uncle Steve, but also he really loved the adaptation of Under the Dome. So I think that his taste in these things might be a little questionable.
I have a theory about that. And I think in the case of The Shining in particular, The Shining is a story about an alcoholic writer wrestling with his demons. And Stephen King is open about it. He had substance abuse problems in parts of his life. And I think that when Stanley Kubrick adapted that story and made it less about the writer's inner turmoil and trying to find some redemption within that character, and more about how that character is an abusive father and a monster from scene one, I don't know if Stephen King was guaranteed to like that very much. And I think if you look at it in a similar way, if you look at it as Stephen King probably had a relationship with his own car at some point, the idea that Arnie Cunningham just like almost immediately just falls into corruption through like this one sort of symbol of independence and sort of a symbol of his own like masculinity, his ability to take over things. And it's less about at the end, maybe he had something left in him after all. Maybe there was some redemptive arc. And I think maybe Stephen King doesn't find that lack of inner turmoil very interesting, for better or worse. His relationship with The Shining, I think, is very obvious at this point in that because that is a raw nerve of a novel that is literally his worst fear given to the page. Yeah. Am I going to become this alcoholic mess of a person who would violate the very
tenets that you believe in, that you entered a marriage and that you protect your family, and you would let that go for the drive of writing something on the page. And that fear that is very real to him, and you mess with that, I just don't think it's going to end well. It has almost nothing to do with the movie that it ends up being. It just is. I don't think anyone can make him really happy about that, nor should it. It just is. When it comes to Christine, I think there's elements here that are just different for Stephen King than they are for John Carpenter. Like, Stephen King explicitly connects Christine to 1950s rock and roll that he grew up on. It's this brash new sound. It's brimming with like forbidden desires and a rebellious attitude, sensual delights, and it's drenched in tragedy, you know, from like the money and the credit that's stolen from the black artists who pioneered the sound, to like young people like Buddy Holly, who's on the soundtrack here, and Richie Valens, who just, they blaze brightly, you know, before being snuffed out. And Arnie inherently would love to shine that brightly in the novel. These are things he would love to attain. There are things about that car that mean something to someone who grew up in the 50s about freedom. Once you're behind that wheel, you become disconnected from what you left behind. It is literally a vehicle that transports you somewhere else. And in order to have that, he has to make sacrifices, and some of those sacrifices will be his own sanity, his own morals, and eventually his own blood and the blood of others. Now, compare that to John Carpenter, who's a very different cat. And he just doesn't share King's, at the time, generous view of the 1950s. Like, he's just much more cynical.
Yep.
The two of them can't be, I don't think they're that far apart politically.
I was going to say, which is interesting. They're also about the same age, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, they're from the same area, yeah.
Right. But, you know, when you hear about Carpenter, he talks about growing up in Kentucky and stuff like that, and he's entering this age, he's just so pissed off at the right turn of America and Reagan. He can smell the stink a mile away, and he's not afraid to tell people. It doesn't necessarily make him the most popular person around when everyone else is making money. And he's like, you're participating in a corrupt system. I just want to make art, man.
Really, really interesting, because, you know, we think of Stephen King as this incredibly dark horror author, but so much of his work is steeped in, I think, maybe the most genuine nostalgia. Like, yes. It doesn't feel weaponized. It doesn't feel like it's commercial. It feels like genuine. And he wants other people to experience it too. Just what it was like to be a child. Yeah. For Stephen King, it was the 50s, and that's his idyllic time. For you, it might be something else. But regardless, I think that's what he connects to. And then you look at a lot of his movies, books, obviously, also about thinking of the movies. You know, you look at something like obviously It. Yes. Stand By Me, the opening of Dreamcatcher. Those are the Holy Trinity, right? I think we can all agree.
Absolutely.
Yes. All ending up in something we can loft as high as butt weasels. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I can think of a single film in John Carpenter's filmography that feels nostalgic.
No.
The one I can think of maybe is just the one he co-wrote, which is The Resurrection of Bronco Billy, which is a short film that he did in like college that won an Academy Award. But he didn't direct that, so I don't know how much credit you want to give him for it. But no, his films are not about that. His films are about, like, Stephen King does this too. And like, if you look at like this idyllic idea we have of the 1950s, well, It is also about how that was also one of the most evil times in America.
Exactly.
But John Carpenter would probably only show you the evil times.
Yeah.
And there might be like one or two people with some hope in them, but they'll probably get crushed.
I think they're on parallel paths. Just King is just a few years behind Carpenter in terms of him coming to terms with these elements. He's drawing on those childhood things too heavily. He's too centered on the individual characters within those frameworks rather than the political framework. Whereas when he gets to It, that's when he's like, oh, there's a decrepit nature to this idyllic suburban town of what they are sacrificing to have this appearance of being idealized. Whereas Carpenter, right around this time, he's seeing Ronald Reagan, getting elected president, a political figure who's like surfed on a wave of 50s and 60s nostalgia.
Yeah.
And that point, Reagan switched parties and actively worked against youth movements to calcify and entrench the military-industrial complex, stifle union growth, and later smuggle arms to another country and pay for it with cocaine the CIA would lace into black communities of urban centers in order to destabilize multiple generations of America. I'm sorry, I blanked out. Am I still talking?
I'm amazed you have all of that off the top of your head, because it's a lot that happened, wasn't it?
It was just,
jeez.
It's almost as if I'm haunted by it. My apologies. But Carpenter is anti-nostalgia, right? You said it perfectly. And I think that's the take he latches onto with this movie, because the book is not as calcified in the public consciousness as everything else is. Like, I think if you were to ask like my parents, like, what is a Stephen King, book? And they would say X, but evil. Like, it's a town, but evil. It's a hotel, but evil. It's a dog, but evil. And Carpenter is like, wait a second. It's not necessarily the car, right? Because in his eyes, Arnie never lived in the 50s. It's not a time that he wishes to live through. That's not really the core here. And so Carpenter knows that the idea of the 50s isn't the movies and the television, the rock and roll radio. It's this freedom, if you're a white male. That's
the key thing right there. You can't leave that part out, because for Arnie, the power trip that he is on, part of it is, he has a car and that's symbolic. Part of it is just old-fashioned misogyny.
Yeah.
The idea of being dominant. And that's one of the things that makes him, like, even before the car actually starts killing people, you start keying into that, and you realize that at the beginning of the movie, we're sort of there's a natural inclination to sympathize with Arnie because he's a nerd, he's bullied, he's got like one friend. Of course it's John Stockwell, and he's like the nicest guy in the universe. We want him to succeed. We think, oh, this is our underdog hero. And very quickly we realize that what the car is bringing out of him is probably a lot of inner resentment and darkness that have been there the whole time.
Which is something that King plays into a lot, how, these bullied kids, kind of cultivate a real taste for vengeance, whether they ever actually act out on it or not. He really plays into the psychology of bullied children in a really effective and unsettling, if you are a bullied child yourself, way.
Yeah. No, and that's something I've always keyed into about King. And I know like King has like certain storytelling tropes or archetypes that he comes back to over and over again. And it's easy to turn him into a joke. I already did is there an alcoholic writer in a Stephen King novel? What are the odds? But I will say this, most of those things he does really, really well. And I would argue that I can't think of a single storyteller, regardless of medium, who I think understands the inner cruelty, just the baseline cruelty of the bully, the way that Stephen King does, to the extent that it seems like these characters don't have very rich inner worlds in a lot of Stephen King stories. He doesn't have a lot of sympathy for him, but he still makes them feel incredibly real, because when you're being bullied, that's how they come across.
Right. Yeah. They do. I mean, sometimes they seem a little over the top, but that's how.
So did my bullies.
Right. Exactly. That's how a kid would perceive them. And what makes when they destroy Christine the first time, heartbreaking and repugnant, is they didn't want him to have something that made him happy.
Yeah.
And it's just a bit on a bigger scale when, you're walking through the hallways reading a book and someone knocks it out of your hands.
Yeah.
They just don't want you to have anything that gives you pleasure.
And there's so many like people who either were never bullied or were the bullies or forgot what it was like in school when they're adults. that need to have that explained to them, and that always baffles me. The idea like, why would they steal your homework? How much are they going to get for that on the black market? I'm like, they did it to be cruel. How do you not know that?
It's humiliation. They don't gain anything from it except satisfaction.
Exactly. It's about cruelty. Cruelty is the point, and I think Stephen King gets that. So, in movies like Christine and Carrie, that was my first introduction to all of these, the movie version. They're portrayed as these horrible monsters. I believe that they exist. I 100% believe in those characters. But because of this innate vileness in their soul, it sets them up to be the recipient of really intense karmic justice.
Yeah. Well, and Christine is the vehicle that makes that happen, because it literally takes him back to a point where he has the attitude that he can do whatever he wants, no matter who gets hurt. And that Christine is transforming him into an idealized version of what he thinks he wants to be. I think you see a lot of turmoil in him as the movie progresses, as he fights against, now that he's achieved these things, are they what he really wants? Mm-hmm. But every time he's behind the wheel, inside those four doors, the responsibilities of the real world fade away, and the open road of possibility beckons. And you can tell your parents to fuck off, and tell your best friend he's a dick, and tell your girlfriend that she just doesn't understand, because when you're driving, it's freedom. But the thing is, every time Arnie's behind the wheel, Christine is actually the one driving, and his freedom is an illusion that he cannot escape.
One thing that I was really thinking about when I was rewatching this for this show was how, this is Arnie Cunningham's story. This is about Arnie Cunningham's soul getting corrupted. He got exactly what he wanted, but it was the wrong thing to ask for, or he did it for the wrong reasons, and he's suffering for it. There is absolutely a version of this story that could be told in which it is mostly told from Arnie's perspective. But weirdly enough, the story of Christine is told from the people around him, looking at him change. John Stockwell, he's not the protagonist in a conventional, here's the character who changes the most kind of way, but he's our entryway into this narrative. And he's this he's the jock, but he's actually really nice and sweet and supportive and a decent guy. And he has this friend who he was always a booster of, even when it was not easy for either of them. And to watch him collapse like this, morally, internally, is really frightening.
Yeah, there's a couple elements that I like that Carpenter brings to it, or at least maybe kind of emphasizes a little bit from the book. Is one, the relationship between Arnie and Christine is almost like a vampire and its victim, in that the stronger she gets, the worse he looks. Yeah. It's like she is sapping his strength somehow.
He's the battery that she runs on.
And then the relationship between Dennis and Arnie is almost like the relationship between someone who is losing a friend to drug abuse, where they're becoming somebody you don't recognize anymore. And I think that Stockwell's not the greatest actor in the world, but I think he gets to a place where he. You could see that his heart is breaking over what he sees is happening to Arnie, but also Arnie resents him, being concerned for him. This is bringing out a lot of, the untapped resentment that he's felt for Dennis. That up to that point, he's let go unspoken because Dennis is nice to him. But when we were teens, we all had that one friend who just always seemed to have everything handed them on a silver platter. And it's every once in a while, you're like, fuck you. That should have been me. It's what did you ever do that was, that you deserved everybody to love you and want to be your friend so much? And, in most time you keep that to yourself. But, at a certain point, you're just fuck it. I'm just going to, I'm not going to pretend anymore.
Okay. Well, no, I was just going to say, and again, when you look at it from okay, so here's the story from his friend's perspective, and here's Arnie's complicated feelings towards his friend sort of filtered through that. The other, one of the other key people that we see this through is actually Arnie's parents, who it's established and shown very early on that they are incredibly emotionally manipulative emotionally abusive parents.
Yes.
And they are an enormous contributor to Arnie's strife, probably the primary contributor, really. And we don't like them. And we think they're being incredibly unreasonable because they're not likable and they're being incredibly unreasonable. And yet there is still that moment later on in the film where the bullies have destroyed Christine, as far as Arnie knows. And he's upset. He's mad at his parents because they didn't let him, keep Christine at the house where they wouldn't have had the freedom to do that. Mm-hmm. And he flips the tables on them, and he becomes abusive to them physically in the case of his father. And you realize that this is like a JD film. This is like a juvenile delinquent film for a moment here. This for Arnie, mm-hmm. This feels like The Wild Ones. And for his parents, again, terrible parents, but they're also capable of acknowledging, okay, something's really, really wrong.
Yeah, right we fucked up.
Yeah.
How can we make, is it too late? Those are questions one can ask. But they are attempting to do something about it. And yet he has flipped to the point where he can not see that. And they're not coming from whatever their genuineness is come a little too late. It does not. It's not an excuse for what he does. It is an explanation for how he's so easily led into the trap he's led into. Yeah. Now, I love this, but here's another thing. There's another interpretation of Christine. That's how amazing I think that both the source material and the movie is that you can see it from so many fucking perspectives. I'm quite partial to the queer identity take that future Christine adapter, at least as he's signed a contract for it, Brian Fuller pitched when he was on Fangoria's Kingcast. So I cannot take credit for this, but every time I've watched it since, it has become incredibly obvious to me what is being laid out on screen. Now, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I'm putting this through my lens as well, so my apologies. But I'd suggest people seek out the episode. But he proposes that Christine is essentially a vehicle for Arnie's transformation into the image that he has told himself he's always wanted to be. And Arnie's identity dysmorphia compels him to change everything about himself until he emerges out of the cocoon of Christine into the straight guy who's cool, who fights back against greaser bullies and gets the girl. And of course, that version of Arnie is a raging, violent asshole. Whereas when we see him early on in his conversations with Dennis, and they have that little conversation in the car after he's bought Christine, and he's like, "What is it about this? Like, who are you?" And he just wants to reconnect with this kid that deep down he loves. That's why he's continually hanging out with him and standing up for him. And that love might not be sexual. To Arnie, it might be confusingly so. It might be the first love connection he has, even though he knows it won't be realized. There's still a part of him that would love that to be. At least this guy loves me.
Yeah. Yeah,
when you're Christine, that gets that changes.
When you're lonely and you are, starting to feel certain feelings in general, it can be very confusing when you have only one other person in your life that, and you project a lot of things onto them.
Yeah.
There's and I'm glad you brought this up actually, because rewatching it again, and I hadn't seen it in a while, and there are moments, especially in like the opening of the movie, where I think John Carpenter makes that a little bit more explicit. There's a scene where they're in like the auto shop and the bullies are bullying Arnie. And one of the bullies ends up like grabbing Arnie in the crotch, and, there's a close up of it. And he kind of gives Arnie like a look-see, like afterwards, that's like weirdly intense. When the bully, like, after that, like, rips open Arnie's lunch, which had like yogurt in it. It spills out in this, like, just this embarrassing pile of creamy white fluid.
Yeah.
But I think even more than that, because all of that's like the kind of stuff like, okay, so he's associating this with things that get him bullied, his sexuality, with his friend Dennis in the car early in the movie, and I forget the exact line, but he's saying like you don't think I'm uncool or anything, do you? And Dennis says, and I'm quoting here, no, queer maybe. He makes a gay joke. And Arnie is like, oh, come on. And he shakes it off. But that's telling Arnie right there, if Arnie is queer, if there is a part of him that would identify with that, even his best friend is saying, yeah, but that wouldn't be cool.
Right.
And so that, again, the repression continues.
I mean, what leads up to that, it's very interesting because he goes like, what is it about Christine? And Arnie goes, it's the only thing I've ever found that's uglier than I am.
Yeah.
And Dennis turns to me and goes, you're not ugly, Arnie. As if to say, whatever you think is broken about you is not broken. And Arnie's response to that is, I know what I am.
Yeah.
And that is when the queer maybe comes out. And we do have to give Dennis some grace in 1978 that one would not be as politically correct about these things. He's attempting to reach Arnie because he generally wants to reach Arnie.
Yeah.
And we've already heard him go, we got to get you laid this year. And Arnie beg off of that to the point where he's like, maybe I'll just masturbate already. And he's kind of like, okay, maybe he's not into girls. And that doesn't change how I feel about him as a person. He doesn't know how to communicate that, but he is genuinely trying to reach him as a person.
No, and I think it's worth noting that again, I think he brings that up, and I think that it helps create an environment where Arnie doesn't feel okay. There's a joke early on when he's talking about playing Scrabble with his mom, and he could win the game if he plays the word fellatio.
Yes.
Of all the words they chose, that's a very telling word. That's where his brain went. I guarantee you I could look at those Scrabble letters and possibly come up with other options for him. But he had to do it. He had to try to communicate that to his mom. But no, you're right. And I don't think there's like genuine like hatred coming from Dennis in that scene. But I also think there isn't a lot of genuine understanding or about that particular topic. And you're right. This is kind of pervasive in media of the era, even characters who are sweet. Like there's Bill and Ted in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. There's a joke where they just blast out the F word once, and they've all apologized for that. They all thought that was inappropriate. At the time, there were many jokes in the 80s.
Yeah, 80s. Yeah. The 80s was, Patrick and I were both teenagers in the 80s. And just like, it was like, for boys, it was just a rite of passage at some point for you to be called the F at some point. And like, just, randomly, it wasn't even like, oh, you're taking dance lessons or, some stereotypical nonsense. It's just like, that was like the go-to, I'm just going to, you hit the hardest insult.
Yeah, and it doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't mean that, like, as a modern audience, if you're watching these movies, that you have to turn off your sensitivity to that. It's okay to feel offended by that and even find some of the movies, which go really, really far in that direction, gross and hard to watch. That's totally fair and reasonable, but it's all part of a tapestry, and I think in Christine, it actually, I'm glad they don't go further with it, but it fits the narrative, and it certainly fits this particular subtext.
I mean, it feels believable both to their friendship and the time period that it's in, even if it's hard to watch now.
Yeah.
And this movie is playing a delicate game in a lot of respects, and I just think it speaks to the quality of the motion picture that it can be all of these things. Maybe they're not all delicately handled, but they're all there. And they are all real. They're all character based. This is not an empty exercise. And I do feel like there was a time and a place where people thought it was kind of a cash in. Here's Carpenter trying to get back on his feet and stumbling. It's like, no.
Roger Ebert reviewed this movie and said when it was over, he wanted to like put his pedal to the metal down the highway. I'm like, Raj, How are you getting that out of this? I grant you there's some cool car stuff in the movie. It's supposed to be horrifying, Raj.
Yeah, no, it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
If there is one problem, and I put problem in dick fingers with this movie, is that Christine is too goddamn cool. Okay?
Yes.
Because in the book, you know LeBay is evil, and he's just like this weird skeleton guy who's hanging out in the back seat. In the movie, Christine just starts taking out assholes from the jump.
Yeah.
And just like transforming a nerd's dreams. And right up until the point he tries to deep throat Lee, or she tries to deep throat Lee to death in the drive-in, like, Christine's fun. Like, when Christine transforms, again, William, you're absolutely right. It's dazzling. It is an incredible cinematic moment. And it is fucking cool. Christine is too fucking cool. It's hard to make Christine it's running around like Alan Rickman on wheels.
But she's never, it's interesting though, because although the people that, for the most part, actually, I have one minor critique, and I've always had it, and I've never really articulated it, I think, until recently. There's one kill in this movie that I think is weird and unjustified, but for the most part, yeah, she's killing the bullies and stuff, and that's, you know, we're kind of hardwired to be okay with that, especially in a horror context, dramatically. But we don't actually have any sympathy for Christine. The only time we have sympathy for Christine, I think, really genuinely, is when the bullies destroy her. But it's not like she hadn't already tried to kill Arnie's girlfriend at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, it's not like Christine is a misunderstood universal horror monster. She's a different kind of entity. She is a proper monster, I think, in the John Carpenter version of this, where there's an allure, there's a coolness. There would have to be, otherwise Arnie couldn't get suckered in. But underneath it all, she is a monster. She's a monster who's capable of feeling this possessive, corruptive, corrosive love. Sure. But it's a destructive love, and that's all she's capable of. Love that destroys the person she's loving, and hate. Those are the two things.
I agree with you. So as we enter the film, if we're going to talk about characters in the order in which they die, we must discuss this opening, which features the only 100% not based in the 50s Beyond attitude, Bad to the Bone by George Thorogood and the Destroyers, which I think is the crowning glory of marketing of the motion picture.
Oh yeah, and if you watch the trailer for this, it is so stripped down, and you know, if you wanted to find out more about this movie, you're going to need to come watch it, which I thought was you know, good, but also at the same time maybe ultimately to the movie's detriment.
Might not have helped it.
Yeah.
Christine's first victim is an assembly line supervisor whose crime appears to be stopping her runway walk. Frankly.
Well, are we talking about the guy whose hand she mangles, or the guy?
Yes.
Okay, so that's not a kill though. That's a mangle.
No, he's mangled.
Yeah.
But frankly, that hood weighs about 35 pounds. You should not put your hand anywhere near it, you know, without any sort of protection.
No. That's on him. She's teaching him safety.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's on him.
That's a love.
He was shaking hands with danger.
Yeah.
In absolute Mystery Science Theater 3000 terms, he totally was. So that sort of blood. And if you were to think, now Christine has a taste for blood, another auto worker ends up just hypnotized by her, wandering inside, and his mistake is flicking his cigar ash on her plastic covered seats. And that's enough for him to end up suffocated inside just at quitting time, by the way. The bell is wrong. That is cruel and unusual punishment.
I mean, come on. Didn't you guys ever have, like, you know, grandmothers with like the plastic covers on their couches? I mean, you don't think you don't think that if you dropped a cigarette ash on them, like they would just put like a dry cleaning bag over your head or something?
And that mentality comes from the 50s, just like Christine. So it's very apropos.
Yeah,
it's very apropos. And listen, that is a classic example of how a lot of horror movies work, where characters will be punished to an unreasonable degree for usually a relatively minor crime. You know, like the bullies and Christine notwithstanding, that's usually like the guy in the hitcher. Oh, I picked up a hitchhiker. And then the hitchhiker has the right to ruin that guy's life completely.
It's here's just like it's just disrespect. She feels disrespected because he is marring her upholstery.
Yeah, it'd be like if you slapped Bugs Bunny. Well, you're dead now. You died. you screwed up. Bugs is gonna get you.
Right. He's just trying to get from one place to the other, and you fucked it up. So in that sense, you are once again shaking hands with danger. Whereas a lot of that 80s slasher stuff has that reactionary, you violated what we conceive to be a moray, and therefore your presence amongst it just invites death. In a sense, as I have talked about it over the years, because you have a generation that's kind of coming off so much death of young people in the Vietnam conflict that they had to find art that translated the pervasive, oh my God, we could die young concept into something they could see. And that revolves a very reactionary, public-facing, Republican, my apologies, fuck you, mindset where, again, we went through Friday the 13th, but you go off into the woods to fuck and to drink and to smoke weed and you die. And ultimately, those who quote unquote don't survive, when in fact, Friday the 13th movies, those final girls up until a certain point do all three of those things and survive just well because hymen is not a magical object. It does not prevent you from harm, everyone. We need to get past this shit.
And marijuana isn't a death sentence either. Laurie Strode smokes pot in Halloween.
Yeah.
People forget that.
Alice smokes pot. Alice almost has a three-way in the first Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Okay? Like, she sleeps with Steve, the camp owner. She's like, I don't think I want to work in a place I mistakenly slept with the boss. And he's like, give me another try. I'll compliment your artwork. And she's like, oh fuck. See, but then like Bill shows up. She's like, well, I kind of like Bill. And Brenda also, oh shit. If we all get stoned and naked over Monopoly, that board is just a medium to all sorts of fun. And the only reason she survives is pot makes her sleepy, everyone. Pot makes her sleepy. You go 4 to 5 rounds with a 58-year-old, you might come out the other side if you have a machete you pick up. I'm just saying.
We got off in the weeds a little, I think.
Well, just a skosh.
You're very passionate about this, and I admire that.
Yeah,
that right there.
Perhaps I should put my foot on the brakes.
No, you're fine. Like, but that right there, that idea, that trope, if you will, that 80s slasher movies are sort of this moral, almost this sort of cautionary tale, the kind you would hear about, like, yes, and then they had premarital sex, but then they died in the car and they went to hell, like that kind of thing, like supposed to like warn kids not to do bad things. And like the earliest stories that were literally intended like for children, like in like the 1800s, were mostly stories trying to like scare kids into like behaving so that parents wouldn't be inconvenienced. There's a lot of that in our stories, fairy tales and so on. But what happens, I think, in a lot of these sort of genres is that the most important films in early films in the genre aren't necessarily the ones that invent the genre. They're the ones that codify it. They're the ones that make it easy to replicate.
Yes.
And when
they make it look easy. Exactly. And so everyone thinks I can make one of those.
Yeah. It's like, if you look at like some of the earliest like proto slashers, it is very, very difficult to copy Bob Clark's Black Christmas. It's actually really ornate and strange. On the other hand, Friday the 13th has a lot of things that are incredibly easy to copy. Halloween is incredibly easy to copy. You don't need a lot of money. You hit the 5 or 6 of the main tropes and plot points, and you just change the location and the characters, and you're printing cash. So after the fact, people are looking at these movies, it's not necessarily in their original intention, and saying, how can we replicate this? And they will look at things like, well, it's about a bunch of teenagers smoking pot and having sex, and then they die. Well, it doesn't take brain surgery to get you from point A to point B and assume there's some sort of causality. It's not necessarily accurate, but it's obvious that that's what happened. And then all of a sudden, that is the trope. It's not because it was the trope. It's because that's the part of it that's easy to copy.
Yeah. And whereas Carpenter, outside of Halloween in its structure, and just because those friends feel so lived in, they feel real.
Yeah.
And he sets up these sort of things, but he never really goes back to it. There aren't things that he does that are necessarily plot tropes necessarily. He just invests well in characters, and he understands a mood. And I would posit that the mood of Christine is
we're back.
Oversexed. Everyone is horny and a half. When Lee shows up, she is described by one student as she looks smart, but has the body of a slut, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. And then mere seconds later, we see her in the hallway, and I'm telling you, about the sluttiest outfit you're ever going to see: khaki flat front shorts, a bulky sweater, and knee socks. I mean, she's asking for it, everybody. She literally is existing, and they have boners that you can see from the moon.
But here's the thing, and the thing is, that's high school. Everyone's hormonal. Nobody knows what to do with those hormones or how to respond, and everyone's making big mistakes about how to like communicate it. But what's odd about that is everyone is responding to Alexandra Paul, who I actually really like as an actor. I think she's good in this movie, and I think she was like the best part of Baywatch forever. Everyone's responding to her really, really sexually, and yet there's Kelly Preston, who is only in a couple of, she's like, has like one scene with dialogue, and then they keep coming back to her. Like there's a moment where all the boys are at the far end of the library, like, go on, ask Alexandra Paul out. And John Stockwell is just like, oh, I don't know, man. I'm so scared. And he has to walk past Kelly Preston, who looks up at him and with this look on her face, like, are we going to sex today? And he just walks past her, and she's like, to go after this person who is, she says herself, she's interested in sex. Like she's making out with Arnie. There's some groping going, but she's not ready.
Yeah.
They want the sex, but they don't know what to do with the actual offer of sex that's on the table, which is so weird.
That's where you have to wonder, like, is Dennis's heart in this? Because Kelly Preston is throwing herself at you. Kelly Preston is throwing herself at you, and you're like, I don't know. You're not wearing knee socks. There's just something about the newness of Lee that just everyone is pushing towards figuring out how to break down the mighty shield of Lee. And they just look past someone who's has heart eyes pumping out of her face at you. And you're like, I don't know.
But I do think it's funny how when at the football game, when Dennis does a literal double take, like something out of a cartoon, and Arnie and Lee like smooching on the sidelines, and is so distracted that he gets his shit wiped out and is off the team for the rest of the year because he's broke his leg.
It's been folded in half,
right? And it's just like you could put any interpretation as to what he is shocked over.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether it is Arnie having the confidence to be smooching on this girl in front of God and everyone, or that that Lee has elected to go out with him instead of Dennis, or you could go back to the complicated feelings between Dennis and Arnie. He whatever it is, he is shocked beyond words.
And there's Christine behind them.
Yeah,
who the last time he saw this, it was a bucket of rust, and it just looks like it came off the assembly line up behind them. Just take your pick at all of it. And he's just baffled, and rightly so.
And I think baffled is actually a good way to describe Dennis in general here. And I'm going to go with, Brian Fuller has his own sort of queer take on Arnie. I have my own queer take on Dennis. And, part of this is because I'm asexual. I'm on the asexual spectrum. And I look at Dennis and I look at the way everyone around him is sexualizing things, and he's weirdly impervious. Kelly Preston is throwing herself at him. He doesn't care. Everyone else, the first time we see Lee, everyone else is ogling her, talking about, I would like to sex her very much. And he's just like, yeah, go for it. I don't care. He doesn't care. They have to goad him into asking her out. And again, on the way, he passes up an actual offer on the table from, again, Kelly Preston, who is gorgeous. And so when he sees Arnie, there's obviously, I think there's an interpretation of, oh my God, that's the girl I asked out, and she went out with Arnie. For me, I think it's less that she's making out with Arnie. I think it's less that the car has been repaired, which theoretically he probably knows about since he's friends with Arnie. He knows he's been repairing her. It honestly is probably just, oh my God, has Arnie been ghosting me for sex?
So he's like,
he turned begged off of this up until this point.
Yeah, him too? My God.
Yeah.
Didn't we make a silent pact that neither of us voiced that we would not be sexing?
Yeah.
Well, it's weird when you're like 16 and suddenly, your closest friend is in a sexual relationship with someone.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know if I'm supposed to treat you the same way anymore.
It's entirely foreign because it is often the first time you're dealing with that from your perspective. They're dealing with it for the first time from their perspective. No one has previous experience to draw upon. You might as well have fucking flying cars going about because it's unprecedented territory you're entering into. It's like being told, like reading in a book how to ride a bike and getting on a fucking bike.
Yeah.
Like, you can hear about balance and pedaling, but until you're forced to do it while a bike's in motion, you're not riding a fucking bike. And that is awkward, and people spill and people fall, and emotions are raised, and it's a whole thing. Then you enter in hormones and all that stuff. It's just a crazy concoction to try to deal with while you're playing football, actively playing football.
I'm going to say this right now. We are 57 minutes into this podcast, and technically we're still on the prologue. We technically never got past the prologue. We've been skipping around a bit.
Well, I mean, they buy Christine.
You're skipping some deaths because some of them happened off camera. The previous owner died in the car. His daughter died in the car. His wife died in the car.
We only deal with deaths on screen here. If we went
just being
into
thorough.
What deaths we don't see, there are people who are dying in houses that we're never even meeting.
Okay, touche. They are important to the plot, though. I'll just throw that.
Yes.
Okay.
It should be noted. This is where the confrontation that we talked about earlier happens with Buddy and Moochie and Rich, who you might know from Ghostbusters.
Yeah, and he looks
hair
like
volume.
Oh, it's ridiculous. He looks like Jim Henson's Eraserhead babies. Like, I love
Okay,
him.
that's better than my joke. I'm leaving that there. And Moochie is the one whose attack style is grab your balls from behind, which is quite telling. And then you also have Dawn, played by Friday the 13th, Stuart Charno. And I urge everyone to Google Stuart Charno's just cast picture that comes up whenever you look up the cast that he's in. He looks so fucking surprised that he's being photographed. It's an oddly compelling choice. And I'm not sure it's his choice, but it is a choice. So there's that. I do love that Mr. Casey, the shop teacher, is unafraid of Buddy. Yeah. I mean, on a cellular level, he's
he deals with buddies every year. Buddy just happens to be the 40 years old. I mean, he's probably been dealing with Buddy specifically for 20 years.
Right. There's no surprise with Buddy when he's been in your class for a decade.
When he looks at first day of school, he's looking at the student roster. Oh, Jesus Christ!
Fucking again.
What's actually more interesting is the fact that Buddy is intimidated by this guy. Yeah. And you realize that, because this guy has some power over Buddy. This guy can kick Buddy out of high school, and for Buddy, that's got to be just terrifying. He's lived there for 2/3 of his life.
Right.
Where am I going to go?
What's he going to tell people back at the Senior Citizen Center when he's been kicked out of high school?
But I will say this. The fact that Buddy is obviously that much older, and we joke, okay, he's been held back. Probably true. He is probably this like weird aberration in the school who is technically, like physically more powerful and technically.
Oh yeah, yeah. Everybody had, most people have that like 20-year-old with a mustache in their senior class,
and then they're just beating up on the 14-year-olds, and it's like, dude. Wait,
you're like a whole ass adult. You could go to jail for this.
Exactly. Yeah. And which again fits the role. He's supposed to be intimidating and terrifying. And also the implication is probably not that bright.
Yeah. No.
You know?
No. I would not call anything Buddy does exists around an atmosphere that encircles him bright. It should, like, there's this one scene when Dennis and Arnie are pulling down the street where Christine is parked outside of LeBay's house. And it starts through the car window. And then Arnie goes, no, back up. And as they back up, the camera splits off from them and goes to the right. The world has not existed beyond those two in the car. And then the camera is just attracted. It just can't help itself. It has to find Christine. It is straight out of Taxi Driver. Scorsese pulls the same fucking move. And I'm like, oh my God, I love a director who tells you where to look. Oh my God, why can't we do this anymore?
John Carpenter.
Why can't people tell you where to look?
Had one of the most just innate eyes. Like, and he's got this wonderful cinematography. He's got this brilliant cinematography in most of his movies. And it rarely calls attention to himself. You don't see this like one perfect shot. And it's the shot where the camera pulls off from Christine. But guess what? That's a perfect shot.
Oh yeah.
Like when like the bullies like go into the garage with Christine and the camera like pulls away from Christine and you get this beautiful sense of the place. And then they start swarming the frame and it's incredibly intimidating. That's actually a really complicated camera move. It feels really confident and simple, but the choreography and the movement and it's just, you had to work your ass off to get something that looked that natural.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the work it's all on the screen. I love his control of your attention.
We need to give credit to the cinematographer for that, though. I just want to just as out of fairness, because that right there is Donald M. Morgan, and he did this movie.
Yeah,
he's great.
Yeah,
I'm actually trying to remember offhand like what else he did, and I'm actually kind of struggling at the moment. What else did he do? I'm going to look this up because it's going to bug me.
Yeah.
Hang on a second.
Starman.
He did Starman.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Another great movie. There you go. He did Used Cars. He did a lot of great movies around this time. He did John Carpenter's Elvis as well.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and up until this point, he's, now his name has just leapt out of my mind, who is a cinematographer.
Donald M. Morgan. Dean Cundy.
Dean Cundy. But Cundy is now Cundy is so in demand after those movies that he flips over to like Spielberg and he just becomes the blockbuster guy to the point where in 88 he's doing Who Framed Roger Rabbit and he's just inventing ways to photograph things you've never photographed before. So it's like people come in contact with Carpenter and they have a lovely symbiotic relationship with one another and they elevate one another's work. It's pretty incredible. That's just the miasma of it all. But okay, so another element here we have is casting. And I think this is a rather well cast movie, even the smaller parts. And part of that is Robert Blossom.
Oh, he's amazing.
Oh, man.
Incredible here.
You could like just smell the smell coming off of him. It like comes through the screen.
I mean, he shows up on camera in what is basically a Fred Garvin male prostitute hernia harness.
Yeah, I love that they kept it. That's in the book. That he has this back brace and it's filthy, and I love that he actually kept that.
Yeah, it's a great touch, and he just, from minute one that he's holding back information. Dennis knows he's holding back information, but you can't drag it out of him. He just
wants
this
to get
look in Arnie's eyes, like, well,
and he wants to get rid of this thing.
Yes, exactly. If you have a Deathmobile and someone's willing to pay you $300 to take the Deathmobile, I'll take the $300, please.
Yeah. You know, it's Robert Blossom is one of those great character actors where as soon as you see them in the movie, you know, oh, well, this scene is going to be great. Yes. I don't have to worry about this scene. The scene is covered.
He's going to be an ornery old man.
And the thing is, that's mostly what he did. People probably know him best as just the old scary guy from Home Alone. And that's a great role. He nailed it. That's no objection there. But I just want to give, if you've never seen it, if anyone hasn't seen it, Robert Blossom had one great starring role in Deranged, which is this like quasi telling of the Ed Gein story from like 1973, 1974. And it's really, really cool and good. It's gross, but I think it's really, really good. So I recommend it. Just get credit where credit is due. Yeah, you don't get. He doesn't have
as opposed to the Ed Gein tales that that are like fun romps.
Well, I would argue that Psycho isn't really like grotesquely violent. It's just violent. Some of them are a lot more visceral than others, but fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough. Speaking of casting, later on, when Arnie is told he cannot keep Christine in the driveway of his parents' house, he takes it to Darnell's. Yes. Darnell is played by Robert Prosky.
Oh, I love Robert Prosky.
He's talking like he's got like a pork sandwich stuffed in one corner of his mouth.
Italian beef sandwich lodged in one cheek, Gina. It just unbelievable.
Like the gravy just spills out of his mouth every time he opens it.
And he's such a complete character too. I love Darnell in this movie because when you meet him, he's an asshole.
Yes.
He's an asshole. But I think it's worth noting, he's not an unreasonable asshole. He
understands value.
He understands value, yeah.
He understands value. And when he sees Arnie fix up this car, when he sees that Arnie is capable and responsible and follows instructions, he's like, I can actually use this responsible team in my favor. This is someone that isn't just a shitter. This is someone I can actually rely upon. No, he's just unaware that Christine is a death machine.
Exactly. And the thing is, like, yeah, he offers Arnie a job. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to let Arnie in. Arnie was bringing that death machine just from pure carbon monoxide poisoning. That thing was a death machine when we first meet it. And he lets it in anyway because this kid needs a place to go. And he's like, he's going to assert his dominance over that situation, but he'll let you keep it here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Later, a month later, as things progress, Dennis goes back to LeBay and inquires as to what is the backstory here. Did it actually kill people? And LeBay's like, well, yeah, it killed my brother's daughter. Then it killed my brother's wife. Then I forced him to get rid of it. And then the car, quote, the car came back 3 weeks later. And he leaves it at that. Just like, what do you mean? He's like,
it came back.
It came back.
What do you think I mean? I mean exactly what I said. It came back.
No detail on that. Any detail on that sentence, and it robs it of its magic. But you can just imagine, just like, did it just show up in the garage? Did they find it somewhere? How did that? Your brain is telling so many stories because that's not what cars are supposed to do. That's a weird thing for a car to do. Why would a car do that?
And you have to trust the audience. You do not have to explain, because I have a feeling that many a studio would have given Carpenter the note. You have to tell people.
I feel like that would happen. That would happen now if they, if this was a brand new movie, people would complain we don't get enough backstory about the car.
There'd be flashbacks.
Right.
There'd be flashbacks.
Right, and it's like you don't need to know. All you need to know is did the car drive itself? Apparently. That's all you need to know.
This is something that I think 80s movies, horror movies, understood that I think a lot of horror filmmakers kind of don't right now. I have a theory. I don't know how true it is, but I have a theory that if you, I wouldn't like assume you could direct a great horror movie if you couldn't tell a great campfire story. Like just sitting at the campfire, the light underlighting your face, and you just tell hook hand, but you're telling it great. And I think that a lot of 80s movies and earlier films as well, but I think 80s, for some reason, they just did it a lot, understood the importance of oral history of terror. I'm going to tell you the story of how everyone died at Camp Blood. We don't have to see it. The fact that you heard it is part of it. The idea of an urban legend had power. And that the reason why urban legends capture our imagination is because they force us to visualize these incredible things, and they get under your skin, and the way that you see it will affect the way that you will tell it. And so a lot of like these horror movies, I look at Friday the 13th Part 2, I think is my favorite example of this, because Friday the 13th Part 2 treats the original film as a campfire story. They literally tell it.
Yeah.
And the only character who survives in that movie was the person who paid attention to the story.
Exactly.
They paid attention. They thought about character and subtext. That's how they survive.
The only question is that actually Jason?
Yes. Yes.
But we won't get into it. We talked about it for 2.5 years, Gina. 2.5 years. And here is an example, as you're talking about this, where the pure cinema enters the sphere. Because after this conversation, Dennis visits Darnell's in the middle of the night and looks in the window and sees that the speedometer that he knew said 93,000 miles, and he says it could be 193, has now been reversed to 88. And you put the statement and what he sees together, and when the radio comes on, he knows something's not right. He doesn't know the answer.
Yeah.
But he's been given a whole new set of questions that are very disturbing.
One of the things I love about this movie is how, because again, with the exception of Arnie, and even Arnie doesn't figure it out right away, nobody assumes this is a haunted car. Nobody assumes it is a conscious car that wants to kill and have sex with Arnie. Nobody assumes that. But they all notice things that add up to it. And they're trying to use their like logical brain. One of my favorite scenes is when Harry Dean Stanton shows up, and God, he's one of the best actors ever. And because he shows up late in the movie and he just steals it. It's like Orson Welles in Compulsion. Just all of a sudden, no, this is a movie about Orson Welles now. Okay. And he's, these kids have been dying, and he knows that Arnie had a motive, and he knows that Arnie's been acting weird, but the way he's been acting weird cannot be explained. There are things about this car that are illogical, and he's trying to be like, surely this adds up to murder, right? Well, but the paint.
It's like, I don't really know this kid, but there's something really weird about him.
He could get the whole story right now if he was willing to admit that the pieces added up to haunted car. But he can't admit that. He can't actually present
amongst
that theory.
Us would be able to when confronted with listen, the paragraph is there, but to read it and believe it is another thing.
Yeah, I love that he's a little taken aback by Arnie's like complete and utter lack of concern over this police conversation. He's just like, yeah, whatever. Some kids died. Shit happens. And it's like he's like 16. And think back.
He shook hands with danger, Gina.
Think back to when you were 16 and a cop just came up to you and started asking you questions because one of your classmates was horrifically killed.
Dude, if a cop went up to me when I was 16, I would be thinking things like, do they know I know a guy who knows a guy who can get pot? Like, they must know I know a guy who knows a guy. Oh God, I'm dead. I'm gonna go to jail forever.
It's like, did I do it? I would have turned into like a Chunk in the Goonies, just admitting everything I'd ever done from like age 8 up to yesterday.
Yeah, this is coming off the heels of that. Arnie takes Lee to the drive-in, and they're making out, and he's trying to take it further, and she's like, no. And when they get back in the car, she mysteriously chokes on a hamburger, and he can't get to her because his side of the car is locked by Christine, and she's able to unlock her side, and a guy rescues her, and he witnesses this other man give the Heimlich to her in the most, again, sexualized manner I've ever seen photographed. It is a lot, including after it comes up, there's there's a repose where she sinks into his arms.
Well, she's getting air into her lungs again. She was almost about to pass out.
Yeah, I don't know that you can't give someone. I don't know if it's possible to give someone a high liquid or not make it look kind of suggestive.
I saw industrial films in the 80s that made it look very unsexual. Gina, this is the only one where it really does look like finally she's getting the relief she's so desperately needed up until this point in someone else's arms.
I saw this movie, as I said, when I was like 5 or 6. All right. And you know what? I was able to pick up on most of it. Not the subtext, but I followed along. To this day, I still find it a little thin as to how it was trying to kill Lee. Okay, so I'm going to trap her in the car, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, now I'm going to subtly convince her to make that go down the wrong pipe. How did you do that, Christine? I understand running someone over with your tires. I don't understand how you can lock someone into your car and somehow subconsciously convince them to choke on a hamburger. It's always weirded me out.
Telekinetic. She's carrying. Within the realm of her 4 doors, she's carrying.
She bursts out. She burst out of that grave, went right into a car.
But the other people that she kills, like she kills Darnell by like shoving him against, like crushing him, right?
Yeah, she squishes him.
You could have done something actual. You could have done something. I don't want to talk about that death actually, but
no,
like. No, we're vetoing Darnell.
No. I just find that very harrowing.
Same.
Yes.
But like, yeah, I don't know. That death always struck me as I remember when I was a kid, I was watching and I had seen it a couple of times. And every time I hit that scene, I'm like, can car radios just do that? Because you see, it's a lot of emphasis on the car radio and it's glowing green, all creepy like. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I'm joking. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess car radios would be pretty dangerous. Like in my head, I was just trying to find some connection. And I found it really thin.
Yeah. I mean, the farther you go down the rabbit hole of the King stuff, it's like, all right, she's on the beam, right? The beam that Christine exists on is broken. And Christine can do things that a car shouldn't be able to do.
Yeah.
And if you're within the sphere of Christine, you take on powers you absolutely should not have. I don't know what imbues Christine necessarily that powers, but I just think she's born bad, and this is her abilities, and we have to accept Christine for who she is. It's very important. Now, later that night, Buddy's boys tear the holy hell out of Christine. We've talked a lot about that. It's incredibly photographed. There's decidedly horny overtones to how they take things apart, how they rip seams open, how they use their knives and hammers.
They defile it basically.
Yes. In essence, they are coming at her as a group. Let's put it that way. So it is a violation. And of course, Arnie takes this in stride, as we all know. Just kidding. His sanity fucking breaks. He choke slams his dad. Like, it's a whole deal. And when he returns to try to find some semblance of how can I put this back together, Christine basically communicates to him that together, if he only just work with him, everything can be exactly as he wants it to be.
He feels so alone at that point. He just lost his girlfriend like seconds earlier. He doesn't have his parents. His best friend is technically available, but he's in the hospital. He can't really help him right now.
He's broken.
Yeah. And all he has left is Christine. Christine has done this abusive relationship thing where she has removed everyone else from his life, so all he has is her. And then she shows him something magical. I can repair this piece of myself. And he's at a point now where he's not going to question that. He's not going to be frightened of that. Christine is all he has. And there's this amazing moment where he just walks into this one beam of light and he just says, okay, show me. And then the light turns on and there's that wonderful pew sound effect and the music kicks in.
So good.
And it's this weird jazzy Angelo Badalamenti vibe. And then
the sexy sax appears.
Oh my God. And then because what happened was they took a car and they used like an internal winch to like crunch it from within. They just played it in reverse. It's the coolest looking thing I have ever. I still think in the entire canon of film visual effects, I don't think I've ever been more enchanted than Christine fixing herself.
It's just so great. Perfect. And it's just like, it's all practical. And again, if and when they do, update it, it's going to be all CGI. And it's just like, you're going to lose that visceral feel of something reshaping itself.
They had like 24, 25, 20, like they had like around 25 different versions of Christine, some of which were just cars that look kind of similar, some of which were Plymouth Furies, that they use in different versions of the film. And that's true for any film with a hero car, like a car you can use a lot of. There'll be one you use for driving. There's one that you use for this kind of shot, etc. But Christine has to do some gnarly shit. So they have to fuck up that car. So when they start fucking up that car, when Christine starts going after those bullies, knowing that they fucked up a classic car, it does so much heavy lifting in your mind. It makes it so much more impressive that they were willing to do that for the movie. That just the damage is incredible.
You can't just buy 25 of them. You have to locate them.
Yeah.
You have to rehab them.
It was not a popular car.
Exactly. All of it, it just mentally, it just lives within the framework of the movie and makes it a richer meal, as it were. Yeah. So now that Christine has demonstrated that if you're willing to put in the emotion into this, I can make certain dreams come true. We cut to the flower district of downtown LA, and we see that Moochie emerges from the cab of a truck, and you don't have to be DeAndre Cole to ask what's up with that. Where's he been? Why did he get drunk?
Are you telling me there's subtext?
I'm telling you, Moochie has a move
from the subtext. There's subtext to the guy hitching in trucks who earlier humiliate someone by grabbing them by the balls.
Yeah. All I'm saying is Moochie ends up dying in a wet, tight spot, and it's not lost on me. The chase sequence is very interesting. It's hard to believe that a Plymouth Fury it's easy to believe it can be menacing, but they managed to make that menace in motion because it's a very heavy car. It can't turn tightly. This isn't the Italian Job, but they make it really come alive. And that little chase sequence where he gets into a place where he's like, hey, you obviously cannot harm me with that car. And the car is like, any other car can't harm you.
Yeah, I mean, even the audience like, surely it can't squeeze into that tight little. Okay, well, surely it can't squeeze in that tight little spot.
All right, I'm gonna go if we do any more of this. I'm gonna go if we do any more of this. But you're right. It is this really weird, incredibly intense thing. And it's like John Carpenter films Christina the sequence like a charging rhino. Yeah. Like it's just this giant, massive, like just slab that can move at unthinkable speeds. And it is just racing after you. And even though that guy, is a bad person, he didn't kill anybody. Like you can't help but pity him. Like when Christina is after you, I mean, Jesus, that's
yeah, she's relentless.
He's really, really screwed. Although I will say this, even as a kid, when I'm watching the scene, I'm super impressed by the whole bit where the car crunches into the little tiny alleyway and it rips its sides to shreds because it doesn't care. It can fix itself. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it's crunching its way through that alleyway, but it is slowing it down. I feel like he could walk over the top of it and emerge on the other side. And it's going to take Christine a little time to get out of there. And maybe he could lose it.
Yeah, he's trying to spend a little too much time trying to reason with who he believes to be Arnie behind the wheel.
Yeah.
And, Gina, there's a little bit of what we like to call it's been a good run going on.
Yeah, he does like, oh, well, all right. I guess you're not going to listen. I guess you're not going to listen to reason. I guess you're still mad.
This might as well happen. My top half and my bottom half might as well be separated by 1958 Plymouth.
I do like the spooky moment where she returns herself to the garage, and what was the Darnell is like he's just kind of puzzled that nobody gets out of the car.
Yeah,
when it shows up.
But how could somebody be in the car? The car obviously can't drive itself, but conversely, how the fuck is no one in this car?
Exactly.
It once again, it's that moment where somebody looks at something like, are there flying cars? Do werewolves exist? There's a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, you can see a lot of people. You can see a lot of people, like in a lot of the characters, like just trying to, desperately try to make sense of what they're seeing.
Because the thing that I think people like, there's an interesting disconnect between audiences and horror stories, and it's simply that we're safe, we're in the audience, we're fine. We have a disconnect, and we have one huge advantage over the majority of characters in horror stories, which is we know they're in a horror story and those of them don't.
Yeah.
So to us, we paid a ticket to see Christine. We know there's a killer car in this thing. And I think the movie's really quite genius about it because it shows that people aren't like oblivious. It's just, it's too big a leap for someone who has never been in a world with a living car before to assume that a car is alive and killing people. So we can appreciate that they're not unobservant, but we can also appreciate that this is too much for them. And that's something that it can be tricky. And then you get that moment where the audience is like, don't go in there, you fool. I'm like, they don't know there's a killer out there. So think about this a little bit. Or even if they did, like imagine all of a sudden you're 17 years old. You've been bullying people for the better part of your life. You think that's all life is. You're going to graduate soon. You realize you're about to have all of this like power that being a senior has given you is going to be stripped away, and you're going to be nothing, and your life is over. And now all of a sudden, a haunted car is coming to get you, and you'll be dead in 5 minutes. That 5 minutes is a psychologically intense 5 minutes, because not only are you trying to save your own life, not only are you being like flooded with adrenaline, but you also have to reconcile with the fact that this entire time there have been haunted cars. I'm sorry, I'm not thinking rationally enough for you, guy in the 5th row who's barely paying attention. Like I'm dealing with a lot here right now.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's probably one of my biggest pet peeves about people complaining about movies is expecting the characters to have information that the audience already has.
Yes, you cannot demand that every person living in the movie is also watching the movie. That is not true. Yeah. We just have to give characters that grace, and I feel like that is kind of a little bit lost over time. And partially, Scream is a little to blame for it, but I feel like we kind of repaired some of that damage. But every once in a while, it really rears its head. Media literacy, everyone, look into it. We talked briefly about Harry Dean Stanton and his smiling eyes and fingers that are meant to hold on to a Marlboro Red, talking to Arnie. I just want to point out Arnie is dressed like he works in the kind of shop that lets you know all the different hankies mean in cruising. Mm-hmm. Just, that is an outfit.
Oh, yeah.
Outfit.
That's a guy who's seen a lot of Kenneth Anger movies. Conversely,
and we love a quote-unquote teenager's bedroom here on Kill by Kill, you only see one frame of Lee's when she receives a call from Arnie later on. I just want to point out that there is a crazy fucking sexy Holly hobby on her like.
Oh, I missed that.
It looks like it's pregnant. It looks like it's 7 months pregnant. It is. I will send you the photograph. You will not believe this shit. Not since Amityville 2 have I seen a doll so inappropriate. It is truly something to behold. Love a horror bedroom. Anyways, later, Buddy, Dawn, and Rich end up confronting Christine. This all takes place at a gas station. Christine T-bones Buddy's car right into Rich, who dies in the back wall of the garage. Gas spills out of Buddy's car, and Dawn ends up immolated in a gas explosion, which also catches Christine on fire, who goes after Buddy while aflame. And it's almost as if that Carpenter remembered that firewalk in Halloween 2 and goes, I can do that with a car. And he fucking does it.
Christine on fire and still driving, and there was an actual stunt person in there in like a suit with an oxygen tank. Unbelievable image.
Oh, yeah.
Just a staggeringly terrifying image. It's truly incredible. I think it's worth noting, I don't think we mentioned it yet, that after The Thing, John Carpenter had been attached to a couple of movies that either fizzled out entirely or ended up going to a different director. He came this close to directing Firestarter before this. So he probably was like already thinking about a lot of pyro when it was time to do the scene in Christine. I haven't seen a gas station get this destroyed since Jonathan Winters in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. If you told me Christine was haunted by the ghost of Jonathan Winters and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, I would have believed you. The other thing I love about this sequence, and it's something that like I think it's just interesting sort of cultural legacy about it, is that this whole thing with Buddy running down the highway and Christine chasing him on fire, this is the direct inspiration for the Radiohead music video Karma Police.
Right.
Which is a classic. It's an all-timer. And I don't know a lot of people who have actually like discussed that connection. I remember when that came out and everyone's like, oh, it's so terrifying. I'm like, yeah, it's Christine.
It's Christine.
We're just not going to give the credit for that. Okay, fine. Okay, I guess Radiohead fucking invented it. Okay, good for you. Amazing music video though. It really, really works. But yeah, it's just so, it's the coolest action sequence. Like it's unfucking canny.
It is.
How awesome it is.
And then Buddy's just left like a flaming pile of laundry on the highway.
Yes. Not only run over, but left with a flaming corpse. It's just, wow. It's pretty incredible. And as I've told people on the show before, anytime you're dealing with something that's on fire, if it's a person or you're in that car, the stunt person is not breathing. They can't breathe in oxygen because if you breathe in oxygen, you will literally inhale flame. So you're holding your breath while you're on fire. Mm-hmm. It's a seriously dangerous fucking thing to do. And they managed to do this in a way that looks so fucking cool and nobody was hurt. And holy shit, I love movies.
Such a miracle. And then
it really is.
And then the car comes back to Darnell's and it's like a joke. It's like it comes back and it's charred and it's still smoking and on fire. And Darnell is like looking at it like, okay, come the hell on now.
Well, I think he has to give the audience some relief after what they've just witnessed. Yeah. It's been such a buildup. And then to see this flaming car on the road, what is the aftermath from that? And then you see the aftermath of that. Like, you have to give it up to the man. This is a story well told, y'all.
But we're at the point where Darnell is about to meet his end. And this is my biggest critique with the movie. The thing in the movie that I don't think makes sense based on the internal logic of the movie as it has been presented. Darnell sees Christine on fire, and he knows that Christine's already been wrecked in his place. He likes Arnie, at least a little. So when he sees this thing, it's clearly been stolen and destroyed, and it goes into his place. He gets his shotgun, and he's ready to defend Arnie's property. And he says, okay, get out of there. Someone is trying to hurt Christine. And Christine kills him for that?
But she's seen him. He's a witness to her crime.
And he hasn't seen the crime.
But he's seen the aftermath. Like he is Kato hearing the AC unit bounce and finding a bloody glove outside. Like
I see your point.
He can connect Christine to what has happened.
I see your point, but what is Christine afraid of? That she's going to be put in jail? Like, I think Christine, when you see the movie, with the exception of the guy who gets his hand bit, and you're right, that's like her getting a taste for blood. Everything after that, someone has offended or hurt her in some way, or Arnie. That's what she's after. You're trying to take Arnie away from me. You're trying to take LeBay away from me. I will kill you for that. Darnell didn't do that. You could have come up with an excuse for that. You could have made a reason for like Christine to misinterpret him or him to push things too far or anything, really.
Yeah.
And instead, he's actually being really helpful. And yeah, he gets inside Christine, and I guess, I guess she didn't like it very much, but she just kind of kills him all willy-nilly.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. She just doesn't want him there. He doesn't belong there.
I just find it really thin. I find it really thin. Everything else in this movie is so emotionally motivated that this one is at best a little vaguely motivated. And I think it's just, there's so much internal logic until now.
Yeah, I think he just violates her space. And that's enough for her at this point. She's just not going to accept any of those violations ever again. I think it might be explained karmically a little bit later on when Arnie goes to visit Dennis for New Year's Eve. They go on the road. They're drinking beers. This time, Arnie does not put a beer into a glass like he does in the hospital. Whoever taught him how to pour a beer should be in jail. Right to jail.
Do you think his parents taught him how to pour a beer?
Also, they should be in jail for giving him beer. He's a minor.
Yes.
Okay. Well, just throwing that out there.
This seems to take place in. We later see Buddy Ripperton just buying alcohol, and I was like,
Buddy's 30.
Right.
I buy it from Buddy. Buddy's actually got a legit ID. It's not even fake.
Right. But so they're having road beers on this open, lonely highway, and Dennis is just trying to figure out what is going on. Where is his friend?
He's staging an intervention, basically.
Yes. And Arnie gives a monologue in which he says, quote, "Let me tell you a little something about love, Dennis. It has a voracious appetite. It eats everything. Friendship, family. It kills me how much it eats." That phrase, "it kills me how much it eats," tells you exactly his state at this moment in time. He is the battery that is powering Christine, and Christine is hollowing him out.
Yeah.
He now accepts death. He accepts loneliness. He accepts rejection. He accepts alienating himself from those who care for him, because Christine provides the continued freedom of getting behind the wheel, and yet she steers.
Because she loves him.
Yes. It should be noted that the turtleneck budget on this film was probably $2 to $3 million. Because there's too many fucking turtlenecks in this. But later, Lee and Dennis decide that they have to do something beyond investigating. They just have to separate Arnie from Christine, and hopefully they find Arnie at the other end of this. So they lure Christine and Arnie into a trap at Darnell's with the hopes that Arnie might not be inside her, but they don't know.
Yeah.
They just are pretty sure that Christine will come, and they charge up this Caterpillar front loader, and they're gonna destroy Christine.
I think you're underselling this moment actually a little. Well, first off, I want to say that what Dennis does is he writes like Darnell's Midnight or something like that, carves it onto Christine. And I know they say like, oh, what if Arnie doesn't come? And he's like, well, Christine will come. And I'm thinking about poor Christine trying to read that backwards because it's written on her. It's like Lenrads Ta Tig Denim. What am I supposed to do with Larads? Okay. But the thing is that John Carpenter is coming up with this big epic conclusion to this thing. This isn't going to be Arnie dying like off camera. This is going to be like this huge giant confrontation. And he doesn't just, like we're going to trick Christine into getting into a big magnet or something like that. He's thinking like a horror fan here, because he knows that the only way to destroy a Christine is to bring in Killdozer.
Exactly.
It's actually Theodore Sturgeon's Killdozer, which is one of the best names for a movie ever. It's about a bulldozer that gets a mind of its own and starts killing people on a deserted island. It's actually not a very good movie. It's the best title ever. Not a good movie.
Yeah.
This is
great
the
title,
best Killdozer has ever been.
Yeah.
And Killdozer, people forget. Like Marvin, like the robot in like Forbidden Planet, like had a big career after Forbidden Planet. He would show up on Gilligan's Island. He would show up in Looney Tunes Back in Action. Killdozer only had this one other role. And And he made a meal of it. He knew this might be my last chance to get into Hollywood's good graces because there aren't a lot of roles for killer bulldozers. And he killed it. Literally, he killed Christine.
Yes.
And he was great at it. And he got to see a bulldozer driving over Christine. And it's so satisfying. It's like watching Godzilla crunch a building underneath his foot.
Because you know, they go over the bank of it and it just starts to reform a little. And then it's like, oh, fuck, we have to go full bore.
Yeah.
Halfway ain't going to do it. And he goes all the way over. Before that, though, poor Arnie does meet his end when Christine tries to kill Lee inside the office. And I guess Arnie's just not wearing his seatbelt. Or Christine isn't paying attention. I'm not sure what it is.
He just gets flying through that windshield.
Yeah.
It just gets defenestrated right through that windshield and ends up with a gigantic shard of glass in his lung.
Because
looks great.
Christine was built before safety glass.
That's the thing. It's possible because there was glass in Darnell's office that he's pushed through, that maybe it was a piece of Darnell's glass, but I think it's too long for that. He's killed on a piece of Christine.
Yes. I think that's the only
so
way
ironic.
he can be killed.
Beautiful.
And of course he pops into frame in that incredible, way where he's I need a hug.
No matter how I die, I really hope I have it in me for one last scare. I'm not even the bad guy in the movie. I just want to be like, oh no, he choked on that peanut. Oh, that's too bad. Who do we call? I just gotta do one more. Come on.
Yeah, his dying words are, I should have bought a compact.
Next time, an import. And that.
1877 cars for kids. KARS cars for kids.
Lee for days. I can't get that fucking song out of my head. I hate that song, but it's so fucking catchy.
Donate your car today.
And the next day, we learned that they've put Christine through a car compactor. We get that nice.
It made her a little evil cube.
Yeah.
An evil cube. Is the radio still on? No. That's some other guy with the boombox playing 50s music. Yeah. And we get that wonderful. This must have been the hardest thing, I think, for John to put into a movie, is latest line where she says, God, I hate rock and roll. And honestly, I think that's half of why King hates this movie. That line.
It's like, how dare you?
If there's somebody who respects rock and roll, who hasn't written story after story, formed an entire fucking author band to play it, rock and roll, it is Stephen King. And to end one of his properties, the final line being, God, I hate rock and roll. I think he clinched his fist, and that's the feeling.
Carpenter!
But Carpenter, here's the thing. Carpenter can say the exact same thing. He had his own rock band. They were literally called the Coupe de Villes.
Yes.
He clearly likes cars and rock.
He
has a sense of humor about it, though. That's the difference.
Exactly. Yeah. He doesn't take it personal. Yeah. But I think King, at this moment in time, is taking some things personal. He's human being. I love Uncle Steve. Never get me wrong about that. But he's a human fucking being. And it's a joke. But is it a joke? You know what I mean?
I'm glad John Carpenter had that line rewritten, because as we all know, the original last line in the screenplay, not the book, but then the screenplay, was when Alexandra Paul said, God, Stephen King sucks. And Carpenter was like,
really fucking stupid.
Little too much. Scale it back. Let's get you're at a 10. I want you at a 4. So let's just pull it back.
Let's insult something that King loves, not King himself.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think? Yeah, we still have to do business with this man. So that brings us to the point where we choose our own death venture. That's where we decide, of the deaths in this film, which one would you choose and why? Now, you can suffocate inside Christine. You can get choked to death inside Christine. You can get bisected in a tight loading bay on a dark, wet night. You can get smashed into a gas station repair bay, immolated in a gas explosion, run over by a flaming car, crushed to death in the front seat of a smoldering car, or go through the windshield of that sentient car and end up with a shard of glass in your lung. And William, as our guest, I choose you to go first.
I was bummed out because I was thinking about this, and my initial idea was I want to be run over by Killdozer. But as we see in the last shot, it didn't take. That's not technically a death. So we can't count Christine's death, and I'm mad about that because that was my dream since childhood.
Yeah.
I think, God, there are not a lot of like great options, actually. You're either going to feel a lot of pain or you're going to suffocate slowly. And none of those are fun. So I'm going to go with, just this is purely selfish on my part. Because I have two options here. Do you want the death that's going to be like a really interesting like news story, like outside of the obituary pages? Or do you want the death that's going to go easiest on you?
It really just depends. It's a personal choice.
I'm going to take it easy on myself because I've had a really rough week. I'm going to go with the guy who dies kind of off camera at the beginning of the movie because we actually don't see him suffer at all. We don't know what happened to him. We don't know. Was it carbon monoxide? Did something? We don't know. But I'm going to assume that Christine was new at this and hadn't really gotten like a chip on her shoulder yet. And she took it pretty easy on me.
Yeah, that was quick because he still had that cigar in his mouth.
Yeah, exactly. So it can't have been too bad. It certainly was quick. So I'm going to let him have it.
Sure, go for it. Gina, what say you?
Using the same reasoning as William, I think I'm just going to take blown up in the gas station.
Yes. I, too, am taking blown up the gas station because really it is the force of the explosion rather than the burning that's going to kill you. You're dead long before that actually happens. So I, too, am taking immolated, exploded in a gas station because nothing remains. Whatever part of you is there,
they're like finding
gone.
a pair of smoking shoes. That's all that's left of me.
He's vaporized. He's that skeleton outside the playground in Terminator 2. Like, he's just gone, baby. Yeah. He's bones. So that just about does it. Josh Hollis does all of our artwork and Revenge Body does our songs. Go to Revenge Body Methods at bandcamp.com for this song and all the other remixes. Mr. Bibbiani.
Hi.
Where can people hear more and read more from you?
Okay, well, I'm a film critic. I write for publications like The Wrap and Slash Film. But mostly probably what I do is our podcasts over at the Critically Acclaimed Network. You can find us wherever fine podcasts are podcasted. You can just look for Critically Acclaimed Network. There we are. It's a series of shows. It's not just one show that I produce and host with my co-host Whitney Seibold, also a Los Angeles film critic. We review new movies. We have a new series that we premiered a few months ago called Thank Godzilla, It's Friday, where we're reviewing every Godzilla and Godzilla adjacent movie ever made in order every Friday.
We wouldn't know anything about that. I love it.
We kind of like made our name in the podcasting realm with a show called Canceled Too Soon, where we reviewed TV series that lasted only one season or less and decided whether or not they were canceled too soon. We have several hundred episodes of that. That's been on hiatus for a while, but we've brought it back for Halloween season for an event we call Scary-tober. We're doing a series of failed horror pilots, and the first episode's already out. I know that. Regardless of when this episode airs. And it's for a failed pilot directed by Edward D. Wood Jr. Yeah, called Final Curtain, and I think the show was going to be called Portrait of Terror. And it is just a blisteringly terrible TV pilot, but it is extremely illuminating about Ed Wood's like sort of life and psychology. And we have found a way within that conversation, and it really wasn't even forced. It happened very naturally to compare the work of Ed Wood to Ingmar Bergman, Chris Marker, Lev Kuleshov, and these are unfavorable comparisons, but by God, they were interesting because he's working on that level. You can find a lot more of our shows at our Patreon, Critically Acclaimed. patreon.com/critically acclaimed network, where we have, in addition to our shows ad-free, you can listen to bonus shows. We have a show called All Our Yesterdays, where we're reviewing every single episode of Star Trek in order. We have 200 episodes already in the back catalog. We're just about to wrap up season 4 of The Next Generation. So if you sign up, you get a huge back catalog. We've got a show called Only the Best. We're reviewing every single movie ever nominated for Best Picture. And I think we're about to do 1954 on that one. So there's also a big back catalog. We just started another one there called Only the Best International, where we're trying to track down every movie ever nominated for Best International Feature.
That's quite a project.
So we do a lot of these like really big completionist deep dives. And again, if you sign up to our Patreon, we have other shows that are completely finished and you can delve into, like Holy Batman, where we reviewed every single installment of the Adam West Batman. We did one that we did every episode of Firefly. And there's a lot more besides. So head on over there. And I'm on Twitter at William Bibbiani. I'm on Blue Sky at William Bibbiani. And the podcasts are on social media at Critic Acclaim, because critically acclaimed is like just a couple too many letters.
Yeah,
very annoying.
I know that. Yeah. I think you do fantastic stuff over there. I love reading your reviews. I urge everyone to check it out. Gina, where can people find you on these here internet?
Well, I don't have nearly as much going on as that, but I do write about movies and television at thespool.net. I have recently written there about the new Exorcist movie.
I'm sorry.
I know. I thank you. I know that you had to experience that as well. I wrote about the Saw movies, Criterion's 90s horror collection. At some point, I'll be reviewing the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, even though I have only the most base familiarity with the game. I also have a Substack. It's GinaWatchesThings.substack.com. And I am on Blue Sky and Instagram and TikTok under Gina Does Things.
Do it today, people. Check it out. You know where to find us on the socials. We're everywhere that isn't Twitter. We're on TikTok. We're doing fun things on TikTok now. And you can find our Patreon, where we have lovely bonus episodes. We talk over Halloween and Friday the 13th movies. And we do bonus episodes. And we even do a chat by chat where we answer your questions. And that, unfortunately, is it for Christine for now. But don't worry, folks. The body count will continue for myself and for William. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.